So let me just give us a quick introduction here, and then I'll turn things over to Emmanuel. So welcome everyone to our first Equipping Huddle. This is one of 6 that we have planned for the coming year for Brave Future as a collective. And I know there are some guests, like I mentioned earlier on this call. And so for anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Josh. I'm a house church network leader in Orlando, Florida, but I also have a part-time role coordinating Brave Future as a collective of house church and microchurch movements. And so, we've convened these equipping huddles really for the primary purpose of giving our collective a regular touch point. We've often said that we don't want to take up too much time or take people away from the ground level work that they're doing. That's not our purpose. But it's also become clear that we could benefit from gathering a bit more often and trying to produce more things together. And so this is really a foray in that direction. Each of these huddles is going to be facilitated by someone different. And they're all going to center around a different core value of Brave Future. So Brian Johnson, who's on this call, he'll be doing the one in August, 2 months from now. But I'm kicking us off here today on serve the mission of God, which is one of our 6 core values as a collective. And so to that end, I've invited Emmanuel, who is my friend, and he is here to help catalyze for us a conversation about the key qualities of movement leaders. And so for those of you who don't know Emmanuel is a speaker, he's an author, former missionary, and he has hands-on experience in leading movements. And his most recent book, which is called What Actually Starts Movements, is really an excellent book, and I encourage anyone on this call who's not read it to pick up a copy. But what he does is he reframes the movement conversation around the qualities of movement leaders rather than the specific models or methods that we might use. And so that's kind of just introduction to him, his work. He's going to speak to us more about these things. But as I said before, Emmanuel, it's so good to have you with us. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us and share with us your insights.
It's a total privilege, Joshua.
So I'll go ahead and just turn it over to you. The plan for today is basically for Emmanuel to spend some time just sharing with us his insights, his research, what he's learned. I'm going to have some follow-up questions for Emmanuel, but then after that, it'd be really cool for us to be able to take turns sharing from our own experience. How are we seeing these qualities developed in our own lives, using our own language, our own terminology, in what ways are we trying to develop leaders with these qualities in the context of our own networks and movements? And so hopefully that's where the conversation goes. But we'll begin with just Emmanuel sharing with us, what he knows and what he's learned. So Emmanuel, I'll pass it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you guys, and I will get the conversation started, as Josh said, but we will have a long time where we can interact. And if there's anything you're thinking, I don't want to wait until Emmanuel has landed, which I will do within the next 30 minutes, feel free to raise questions, to make comments, even in the first part of our call together today, okay? Before we dive in, I invite us all to take a deep breath and connect with our loving Father. I don't know how many meetings you have had today already or tasks you have accomplished, but I'm inviting each one of you to take these, whatever residue you're bringing to this precious time together, and place it into the Father's caring hands. And exhale deeply and arrive the present moment. Just connect your heart in a moment of silent prayer with his heart, receiving his love and saying, Father, I'm here. What is it that you are inviting me to today? So we'll have a moment of silence where you can each pray silently in your heart, and then I'll start. Father, it's so amazing that you're the one who takes initiative in our lives, even though we're all leaders and initiative takers. I believe you're always a step ahead of us. And so I ask that you show your presence during our time together. And I ask that you gently nudge and stir hearts and impart something to everyone here. I ask, would it be so that you affirm everyone and you also show everyone a sense of direction or a practical next step, whatever he or she needs. We invite you, Father, to be the master trainer and master instructor during our time today. Amen. Amen. I'm now sharing the screen, and it would be great, as we're here in the Google environment, to hear from you that you see the presentation and not in presenter's mode. And it would be great also so we can interact if you want to have two screens on your screen. And I put the instruction, in case you haven't done that, how to simply do that with a couple of clicks in Google Meet, so you can see the PowerPoint slide as well as whoever is speaking. Josh invited me to share a bit of my own journey and what I've found, lessons learned from own ministry on the ground, as well as my global research with you all. Again, I want to repeat it. If there's anything burning, feel free to just interrupt in the call. It doesn't have to wait until we open up the conversation fully later. So I've been a movement practitioner for about 25 years and spent 10 of those on the ground in Africa, in a Muslim part of North Africa. And we did see movement breakthrough. We did see opinion leaders, in this case, village chiefs, come into the kingdom. We did see political leaders come into the kingdom. We did even see a couple of imams, the spiritual leaders in the mosque, come into the kingdom. And soon, that's how it works with the kingdom. Even though we try to keep it under the rug, people got attention, and I was asked to mentor others. I was asked by my organizational leadership, could I develop a training based on the lessons we learned? And that is what really set me on a journey of research, because I felt, yes, we had learned some things. Yes, we could distill principles of how we did it. Yes, we had discovered best practices that we could pass on to others. But that's really only our situation. You know, it might be entirely different in a different context. So I started sort of as a sidekick in the background, researching movements. And I've done that now for the past 15 years. And there were a number of questions I was interested in, but overall, I tried to wrestled with these questions. I'm a practitioner by heart and continue to be. And research is really what my desire is, to find better answers for practitioners. So really what I was interested in was, and I'm sure you can relate to this. You have mentoring relationships, you have coaching relationships, you have this precious 1 hour or 2 hours every other week, maybe on a monthly basis. What do you focus on, right? You have a training day with Brave Future, and you have at best 5 sessions. What do you pack into this? What do people most need? That's what I was wrestling with. And so I wanted to find out, what are the qualities that actually characterize those who have started movements? Those who you could arguably say are the most effective disciple makers under the sun. What are their personality characteristics and traits? What are their ministry skills? And then, of course, I wanted to remain open and find out in other places too, what are factors that contribute to movements, to disciples making disciples, and churches planting churches. So all these years, I've wrestled with these questions, and I want to share a few answers with you during our call today. First of all, a couple of unexpected findings. What movement breakthrough is not related to, and I'll just mention them. The first one is this. It is unrelated to previous sowing. I don't know if you've heard that notion, But the notion has been around that you say, there must be so many years of wide gospel sowing, and only then a breakthrough can happen. You see on this chart the answer of effective catalysts, how many years of witness there had been prior to their arrival. And you see that in absolute pioneer situations, in some cases, movements were started. So it does not take a lot of previous sowing. A second one is, I'm sure you wrestle with receptivity of the focus group, that only among receptive populations movement can be started. Only like in these places in Africa or the Philippines where you just say Jesus and then people flock around you and want to convert. No, you see here, I used what's called the Dayton scale of receptivity. And I asked catalysts how receptive their focus group when they first arrived on the ground. And you see that movements happen with any level of receptivity. Yes, some among population groups that are strongly favorable to the gospel, but then also some among people groups that are strongly opposed to the gospel or Christianity or Jesus. And in fact, movements, interestingly, happen slightly more frequently among people groups and population segments that are closed, quote and unquote, to the gospel. So it's not related to the receptivity. It's also not related to particular ministry methods. I asked effective catalysts, so again, those who had started a movement with more than 100 churches in 4 generations and beyond, what their primary ministry method was. And here you see some of the common used ones. Under others, typically it would be hybrids where they said, yeah, we do a little bit of DMM, but then we also do this and that. And you see God uses a variety of different methods to bring about fruit. So what is it that movement breakthrough is related to? And the answer is this. It is certain traits and competencies of the catalysts. So God uses all sorts of different approaches, but if we were sitting together with a handful in a coffee shop of men and women who started a movement with more than 100 churches, 4 generations or beyond, these people would have certain idiosyncrasies and certain cultural distinctives, but they would show remarkable similarity in terms of these traits and these competencies. And we will talk in this call what those are. But before I come to that, I just want to back up because I know that to many this finding is surprising, because in trainings, by mentors, by conference speakers, we often have heard that if you just, use these 7 steps, or if you bring about these 8 elements, that's when you will see ministry fruits. So the emphasis on the method rather than on the person. But if we look at other dimensions of life, other aspects of life, we should not be too surprised. So I don't know if how many of you are parents, but it's been said about parenting, right? We can teach our children whatever we may want to. At the end of the day, they will do what we do. It is our example that shapes them more than anything we say in our family devotions or more than any exhortations that we give them. So it's a principle of parenting. Let's look at wider education. This is one of my life mantras, and it's agreed on by educational specialists. We teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. We can have all the knowledge of all the books and all the PhDs, and that may be of value, but what we ultimately reproduce is who we are as a person. So that's a principle of education, that it's the person that matters. It's a principle of communication. You may have heard this adage where communication theorists say it is the messenger who is the message. I mean, plainly put, whether we like it or not, how open and eager you are here today is in part whether you like me or respect me. or Josh as a host. Let's put it on Josh rather than me. It is the person who is the message in themselves, and we only receive a message to the extent that we have a positive attitude, a positive perception of the person who is delivering the message. And then it's a principle of movements. I'm not the first one who promotes this. Bill Smith, who I look up to and revere, he's been called the father of movements. We talk regularly. He said years ago, I think 20 years ago is when he made that statement, and it was published in Mission Frontiers. At the end of the day, he said, it's the man and the woman of God and not the method that God blesses. So others before me saying this today or writing it in my recent book have reached the same conclusion. And last but not least at all, it's more the climax of what I'm saying. Our master has said this before, that discipleship is about being. It's enough for the disciple to be like his teacher. Discipleship means emulating the life of the master. And we know from the Gospels pretty well that this is how Jesus made disciples. So here are the catalytic qualities. And again, I want to say, I was surprised with my research team by the remarkable commonality among catalysts who are North Americans like you guys, who are South Asians, who come from an African village, are Germans like myself, or from any other cultural background. And we even asked, once we had identified these, we went back to them and say, here is a list of qualities with a description. How well does this describe you? And if there's any aspect of this description that doesn't describe you well, please highlight it. And there was a remarkable agreement that all those who participated in the study said, yes, that's me, that's me. So here is a list of them. We don't have the time to unpack each and every one of them. If you're interested, I'm happily, obviously it's in the book, but I can also happily through Josh share a file with a more detailed description of each one of them. Wherever you see a movement of self-reproducing churches, you see a man and woman of God characterized by these qualities. Wow. So here was my answer for the question I wrestled with. I'm asked to design training for an organization. Well, what do I focus on? Well, I want people who are after multiplication to grow in these qualities. So I will certainly design my training around these qualities. I coach, and I do this till today, I coach both movement leaders, those who have started already movement, as well as catalysts, those who are in the process of starting one. Well, what is something that we address and emphasize in our coaching conversations regularly? It is certainly growth in these qualities. So I want to emphasize this, so I'm not misunderstood. I'm not saying there is causality. What does that mean? I'm not saying, well, if you just grow in these qualities, then definitely you will start a movement. No, that would be wrong to assume. But I'm saying the data clearly establishes, and I have looked into more than 170 movements in all these years. Wherever you see a movement, you will find a person, an initial catalyst, characterized by these qualities. So I think we need a paradigm shift. Methods are important, absolutely, but only the right person can either identify or develop the right methods that are suitable for their context. If you just give someone, and I find this again when I meet people who have received training in the so-and-so methods, these 7 steps to movement or to multiplication, and then they execute these 7 steps, and then they're stuck. Why? Because they lack the qualities now to transcend these 7 steps and say, in our unique context, what are our barriers now? What are our blockers now that we need to address or mitigate or overcome? And that is a person, for example, that exhibits qualities like radical learning. They keep learning, they keep discovering. Or like innovation, they come up with new solutions and similar qualities which you saw on the table. So here's the good news. I need to add to this, because I find the notion among Christians often that it's all, gifting is static. Either you are Billy Graham or you are not. When I look at the New Testament, I find that the teaching on the charismata is that they are much more dynamic than many Christians believe. It's not either you have it or you don't. It is, here's an example from Paul exhorting his disciple Timothy, fan into flame the gift of God which is in you. So Timothy has a certain gift, but Paul exhorts him, come on, develop it, bring out all of it, develop it fully, let it shine bright. So it's not static, it is dynamic. And so when you look at the list, and I'll show the table again, and think, oh, that's not me, well, okay, fair enough. Maybe it's not you at the moment. My encouragement is, and my challenge at the same time, it can become more you. A second exhortation from Scripture, just to ground this in the New Testament as well, is Paul again speaking to his disciple Timothy, and I'm reading from the CSV. You see the ESV in the text as well. He says, pay close attention to your life and your teaching. Persevere in these things, for in doing this you will save both yourself and your hearers. Have you ever noticed the order? Paul is not saying, pay close attention to your teaching, and by the way, also make sure you don't burn out or you land into moral failure. No, he says to his beloved son in Jesus, Timothy, pay close attention, keep a close watch on your own life first. I believe because Paul knew the emphasis of the person, the importance and significance of the person, the Paul who writes a dozen of times about the role of modeling and say, you follow my example, or exhorts his disciples like Timothy, live a life that is worthy to be emulated by others. So therefore, the absolute priority, your life first, and then your teaching ministry. I wonder what would happen if those in Christian ministry and leadership changed the priorities rather than focusing on output to develop the life of Christ that is worth to be emulated. So this is the main message. I'm adding now a second part. As Josh shared with me, your desire is obviously also to raise up others in your microchurch or house church networks. And I will make this brief. I want to share 5 elements that I believe are essential in the development, in the raising up of other catalytic leaders. This is not based on formal research, but together with various teams over the years, I have trained probably in the area of 15,000 pioneers across the world. And we have used several training methods and evaluated rigorously. And here is just a synopsis of what I believe what matters most. So the first one is a content paradigm shift. I believe training needs to be much more about the formation of catalysts than about the formulation of methods. And this is a wording I owe to Kevin Higgins from formerly the US Center for World Missions, who shared this in a conversation. The formation of catalysts more than the formulation of methods. The second one is a staffing issue. Who does training? And my advice is from experience: appoint your most fruitful multiplicative leader for training and development of catalytic leaders. This is an image I often show in trainings, and usually people love. And the question is, if you had to pick a coach, who would you pick as your personal coach at the gym? Well, it is very obviously the guy on the left, because he knows what he's talking about. We have found in the various trainings teams that I developed, it is ultimately the personal stuff that people share, their own testimonies, their own stories of wrestling and learning and failing and trying again. And those who have actually seen signs of multiplication, they have identical teaching lessons, right? We standardize the training, it's the same. But one trainer who speaks from significant experience is much more impactful than the others who shares the identical content but cannot fill it with his own example, but has to rely on the stories of others. Now, why is this? Obviously, it's credibility. And again, we're seeing the significance of example. So appoint your most fruitful multiplicative leader to the training and the mentoring of other catalytic leaders. Third, if you think, oh, more work, more training, no, actually it's not. So we have developed an assessment that identifies how well developed these 21, it's 21, it's not few, I admit that, but people can assess, self-assess how well developed these 21 catalytic qualities are. And that means ultimately it is not more training work to be done, but it is less. So they do a self-assessment and they get a result like this, where they see some areas are strongly developed. Well, we can tick the box and say, wonderful, I show assertiveness, I have emotional stability, I am persistent, and whatever the positive qualities that are already strong or developed. Well, let me look at being a perpetual learner. Oh, this is not as strong development. What can we do so our team can grow in this area? So what it means is not more training, but actually less focused training, needs-oriented training. Element 4 is then the content focus. So instead of saying, okay, we have to do this week-long training on all these so many different issues, we can say, this particular group, what is it that they need most? What are the catalytic qualities that they have least developed? Let's then do a training day or a cohort over a period of time and just focus on, say, the 5 catalytic qualities that they need most. The last item, step 5 or element 5 is, I call it delivery diversification. Training events are usually useless. That's my experience, unless they have a follow-up process. Only the most mature leaders receive the input from a training event and run with it. Most people need support. They need a follow-up process to the event. So training events, as long as they have a follow-up process. Online cohorts, I love what you guys are doing. It sounds very much like that's what you want to do, a cohort that journeys together over time. That is effective because the input is regular, is ongoing, there is a next meeting. And ideally, at the end of each call, there is a commitment. Here's what I'm going to do, and until we meet again in 4 weeks' time. Then there is the element of one-on-one, one-to-one mentoring, which goes much deeper, obviously, than a seminar room experience. There is the possibility of peer-to-peer coaching. Why? You and I are in each other's growth zone. We face the same challenges. We wrestle with the same questions. We can possibly learn much more from one another than the guy who is 5 years ahead of me, who is already past this and may not be able to fully understand really what I'm going through right now. And then related to that is peer coaching groups. So in other words, they don't have a trainer or a mentor, but from peer to peer, meet online or on site if that can be done in the same city, and share with one another what are the challenges we're facing, what are the lessons we're learning, and support one another through this process. All right, that is my part. We now want to open it up. Any question that you have, anything that you would like to go deeper on? I hand it over back to you, Josh, and I will quickly share the screen for just a moment. If you're interested in the book that Joshua referred to, you can also download a free section from my website. And there is also a QR to my podcast. Josh, back to you.
All right. Well, first of all, you probably saw me nodding my head throughout it. I recently wrote a book about leadership, character, and how that influences skill development. So this is very close to my heart as well. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. I have a couple of follow-up questions of my own. But I do want to leave plenty of room for the people to ask questions, for us to share our own insights. So let me just ask a couple of my questions. We'll hear what you have to say, and then after that, we'll just break it open to everyone else. Okay. Let me ask you this. During your entire research process, which, if anyone else has read the book, the research process is pretty impressive. I mean, you said 170 different movements. You really thoroughly investigated the data here. What was the most surprising thing that came out of it for you?
It's this that we talked about, how strikingly, remarkably similar catalysts are. I want to say it again. So we wanted to make sure there's no bias. There is something called social desirability bias. So did people tick the box because that's a spiritual thing, hunger for God, expectant faith. So let me give myself the highest mark in all of this. Can happen. And of course, there is room for it that it has happened. So we wanted to do a verification loop, and I'll describe it again. So we came up then with a description of a trait like hunger for God or expectant faith or tangible love or whatever they were. And then we decided to feed that back to participants and say, please highlight in the following description which parts of the descriptions don't describe you well. So it was very easy for them to say, oh yeah, that's mostly me, but that part, not really. And again, how remarkably similar these are. So that's the biggest surprise. There's a second one, and Josh, you can decide how deep we want to go in this. So we not only examined the profile of the catalyst. Here's the second one. So we did a control group with other pioneers, other church planters who worked in the same or similar context than those who had started a movement. And we assessed their catalytic qualities as well. I hope you can see me now. So basically, we found a curve. We then assessed how their qualities developed with age. The youngest participants were in their mid-20s. The oldest one were older than 70. And what you have is that the catalytic leaders started out at a slightly higher level. So you could argue they had a slightly higher gifting. They had slightly more early development through their family, through their church background, but minimally so, negligible. But then here's how the graph developed. So for effective catalysts, they continued to grow slowly, but steadily over all these years. The curve kept creeping up. Now here is the curve, the graph, for those who didn't start movement. It doesn't mean they didn't have a fruitful ministry. They may have planted a number of churches themselves, but they didn't have a multiplicative ministry. they plateaued, and then they started even a slow decline. We're absolutely shocked as a team to realize this. So what does it mean, friends? Let's talk honestly here. Many in Christian ministry, all sorts, but overall we're talking about church planting ministry. They don't only stop growing, but their growth declines. So they start out with a level of expectant faith. They have a certain depth of hunger for God or tangible love for others. But then it declines. The experiences of life and ministry, and everyone who has been in ministry for more than 3 years knows this, there's pain, there are conflicts and hurts, there are setbacks, there are other issues that make us doubt our vision or doubt even our faith. But these experiences cause something in their heart that stints their personal growth. And that I found a very shocking and sad reality. But Josh, we explored this in our conversation recently. I mean, honestly, if we look left and right, it's what we see, right? So to me, this was a sobering illustration how much everything flows out of a man's heart, as Proverbs would say.
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. I'm sure many folks on this call probably would have something to add to that. I'm going to restrain myself to one more question, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. Hopefully giving people enough time to think about this and maybe have some things of their own to ask, or maybe an experience to share. So I'm curious about this, and you didn't cover this in your book. I'm curious if there were any patterns of like cultural deficiencies that you noticed in terms of like catalytic leader development. So most of us were here ministering in the global north. We're leading networks, we're leading communities in the global north. Exceptions to that might include, John Rittner is the head of a missions agency known as Communitas, and they do work all over the world as well as here in the U.S. Felipe is Colombian, but he's currently doing church planting here in Orlando. But I'm curious, did you guys notice any patterns of deficiencies that could correlate with maybe the cultural background of the people? Like, for instance, were catalytic leaders in the global north, like in the US and Europe, for instance, was there any commonality in like the qualities that they lacked? Or, maybe to put the question another way, like, what are some of the qualities that us in the global north really need to focus on developing as a whole? Like, do you have any insight into that for us?
I can offer a partial answer to your question, Josh, and it's this. We try to examine how significant is the cultural background. And so we put in all participating catalysts into 3 containers. One was same culture catalysts. So, you're in the States and you minister in the States. The other one is near culture. So you tell me how this works, but I would figure, you're from Seattle and now you go to Florida and maybe that's not same culture anymore, but near culture. Or, a similar, you come to England, it's the same language, the same mainstream culture, but there are obviously differences. And the third one was, the category was expat, but basically meaning distant culture. And we did compare the data and find there were minor differences, but they were really insignificant. So you want to hear something? Basically, you could say the main differences were in the spirituality. So catalysts from the global south tended to have their spiritual qualities, deep prayer, listening to God, fervent intercession, hunger for God, more strongly developed than catalysts from the global north. That's how I would summarize it. But again, insignificant differences. Insignificant. A 4.2 versus a 4.5.
Interesting. Well, I have I got, 7 or 8 more things I could ask, but I'm just going to see if anyone else has thoughts to share. Both questions for Emmanuel, but perhaps, again, I think there's also value in some of us sharing our own experiences or perspective as well. These kinds of qualities, our own lives and ministries, the people that we're discipling and developing. What do you guys think?
Emmanuel, I have a question for you. As I look at that list, I'm realizing like even that first word, conscientiousness, I'm literally pulling up kind of a definition of that to kind of get a better, well-rounded picture of what that word means. It's not one I use very often. I don't think I've heard that since my report card days. And I don't think it was on my report card very often. But I'm curious, do you have kind of have you created definitions for these, and is that in the book? And I figured you have, but then what is do you see a correlation between those and the APES functions, like the 21 characteristics? Do you see that as actually spanning across all 5 of the functions, or is it, traditional understanding that's more apostolic prophetic or, the APE? Is there a connection there in your mind?
Good question, John. So here's a definition of conscientiousness. It's a tendency to display self-discipline, act dutifully, and strive for achievement against measures of outside expectations. So what does it mean? I believe if we speak New Testament language, it means the kingdom principle of being reliable. So you have a sense of responsibility, and you make your choices in light of that responsibility, rather than following your impulses and whims and gravitating toward comfort. That would be an everyday language description of the reality. So that was one question. And what it basically, I believe, is behind that, he who has been faithful with little is entrusted more. I believe that's what can be seen in that. Your second question again.
Around
APES, yeah. I had discussions with Alan Hirsch and Rich Robinsons about this, and I think we pretty much agreed that the catalytic leader or movement catalyst is a contemporary expression of the apostle. So it means it is typically the pioneer head of a pioneering effort. And most of them all of them work with teams. Most of them work with small teams. And most of them gather around them teams that cover a certain gifting pool. I think there is agreement in the community, and it's a discussion I had with Stan Parks, among others, that often it's work in progress. So ideally, wherever you see a movement, you see an APES team. That's what we kind of idealize. But it's work in progress, and sometimes more realized and sometimes less realized. Another factor is that typically the catalytic leader has as a primary calling and function the apostolic, but has a secondary function, which can either be often evangelistic or teaching, but is not restricted to those. So in other words, it can be a small gang of a team of 4 or 5, but one of the 4 or 5 carries more than one of the 5 APES functions. I hope that answers your question, John. Feel free to follow up.
I've got like 5 more questions, so I'm going to ask mine if no one else has stuff to.
I can just say, Josh, mine's not a question, but more an affirmation and encouragement for Emmanuel. So I'm 53. I resonate with and am challenged by your charge there about basically to continue growing, the challenge to keep growing, the challenge to fight through the hurt, the disappointment, meet God in the midst of that. How important that is, period, for us, but how that can also be catalytic in the lives of others. So I really appreciate you sharing that. So kind of more just a thank you there.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate you being so vulnerable. And I think, I said it's part of ministry, right? And every ministry culture is different, but I can't help but think where the culture is such that this cannot be shared among a group like this, and it's pretended we're always on top of things, then it must end badly for some of those who then assume, oh, I'm the only one facing this hurt, I'm the only one struggling with my doubts. I certainly couldn't bring this to the team because then everyone would look down on me. No, we must assume that everyone goes through challenges, and the more a team becomes safe space where I know, yeah, I can be Emmanuel, even though where I share that I'm massively struggling at the moment, the better the chances that I'm being helped. So thank you, Todd, for sharing that vulnerably.
Hey, Emmanuel, this is Bree from Kansas City. I just wanted to thank you for your time today, and also just wanted to say that I was encouraged by what you were talking about when you were mentioning the camaraderie of people speaking into one another. I think that's so very important. We've seen that in Kansas City. It's been actually a surprise for us in our groups where we're coaching these catalytic people, that they really start just coaching each other, and our coaches just kind of sit back and smile. And it's just such a beautiful thing to watch them do that, to be vulnerable, to pour into each other, to share where their highs and their lows and so forth. So it just resonated with me. I appreciate that research. It was affirming to me, and thank you for all the work that you've done. I admire it. It's just beautiful.
Thank you, Bree. That's very kind of you to say. And I think what you probably do, and I don't know how much aware you are, is we who lead, we who facilitate like a peer coaching connection, we set the tone, right? So I want always to come to a conversation like this and be vulnerable myself and set an example with that. And hopefully that encourages others to open up as well.
I have a question about, this has to do with the question of selection, of discerning, like, all of us are leading something, right? We're leading a house church network, a missions agency, a hub of microchurches, whatever it might be. And so one thing we all have to do is we all have to discern who to invest our time in, right? And I always think of, have you read, Emmanuel, The Master Plan of Evangelism by Robert Coleman?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a seminal work, for me, and has influenced me in a big way, but even though it's old at this point. His very first chapter in that book is about selection. And it's about choosing like who you're going to disciple, like who you're going to invest in. And I've always found that to be a really mysterious concept. Because, how could, Jesus looks at Peter and says, this is the guy, right? Obviously the Holy Spirit revealed that to him. We can't train and disciple everyone, right? And most of us, we're not full-time trainers. We're also pastoring these networks. We're on the ground leading them ourselves. But yet we believe in this idea that we need to develop leaders with catalytic qualities. Like that's the way, whether we use that language or not, it's like we know that that's an essential way in which we're going to see our movements go forward. So I guess my question for you is about discernment, like in terms of looking at the ground level and who we're going to pour our time into, trying to recognize the potentiality for these things to emerge. Because obviously in a very young leader, especially maybe even a young Christian, it's not like all these qualities are already being manifested, right? They might be dormant. So I just wonder what recommendations you have for us on that end.
Mm-hmm. Two thoughts, Josh. The first one is I apply a threefold grid, and the grid is past, present, future. So I look at a person and say, would I, mentor him or her? what is the past track record? And that you say a young person, doesn't have to be the pastor of a megachurch. Well, maybe they lead a vibrant small youth ministry, but it's vibrant. It can be a small town church or a house church that is now beginning to grow and multiply. Early stages, but it's clearly thriving. So past track record, present influence. What's the network of this person where they directly influence others? And the third one is future potential, which of course relies most on intuition. So that's the second thought. Intuition develops over time. And I use the analogy of, I'm sure you've heard this, how the people at the bank till are trained to identify false banknotes. Well, they're not getting a training and say, these are all the false versions that are around. They familiarize with the real $100 note. And so intuitively they say something is wrong with this, should a wrong one show up on their till. And that is what a combination of conscious research and, reading, thinking about the catalytic qualities happens, as well as just the experience of time. I think the longer we select people, Joshua, and the more often we do it, the more our intuition is sharpened. We never get it 100% right, but I think with these two factors, we have some selection success. And then the other factor is still people make choices, right? So we may enter into a mentoring relationship or invite them into an inner circle, but how their trajectory continues, you can never predict that fully. They can still make choices that you couldn't predict yesterday. Although I would say overall the rule is true. The safest way to know how I'll act tomorrow is to look at how I acted yesterday.
A current goal for my network is we want, so part of the way that my network works is that we multiply house churches. And we only multiply house churches with a plurality of leadership. So we don't do singular leaders. We actually try to aim for about 4 leaders per house church. And the way that our house churches have been growing, we've studied the growth of the church, and we've seen that essentially we need, in order to keep pace with the growth that's happening, we need to basically plant at least 1 house church a year. Right now. And in order to do that, we need to raise up, essentially we need 20 more leaders in the next 4 to 5 years is what we need in order to be able to, in order to keep pace with our current growth. Who's to say that it may not, grow faster than that, or maybe it will slow down for some reason. But we want to keep where we're seeing people coming to faith. We're seeing multi-generational disciple making. And so we're thinking, how can we be healthy and see this continue, right? And so the thing, we're like, man, we need 16 to 20 more leaders, and we're not going to recruit those people from existing churches, right? We want to see those folks come up from within in our ministry. And so a lot of the people we're looking at are very young Christians. Like, they're people who've only known Christ for maybe a year or two. So like you said, we don't have as much past. Like, we're seeing them right now engage in serving God, and we're seeing their character develop and seeing what fruit emerges. And then we're trying to figure out how can we then train and develop them so that they are ready for this role. It's what God's calling them to, So this is very much where my mind is. So I'm thankful for your input on it.
Yeah. Well, I love your proactive stance. You're not like many leaders, reactive and we have X number of new house churches and we don't have leaders for them. What do we do now? But you're proactive and saying, if we just continue at the current pace, how many new leaders will we need by a certain day? I usually don't give easy advice, but I feel I want to offer it to you, and maybe you're entirely clear about this already. I like it to invite people in a process and say, hey, look, I believe God has potential for you. And I would like to begin a process with you, and let's determine together and let's discern together. And where this leads will depend on, we'll do some things together. You will have some particular assignments. Where this leads will be determined how you manage these assignments.
Yeah, what I'm currently doing toward leadership development is I'm meeting one-on-one or one-on-two with 5 different young men. And my wife is doing the same. We have many other leaders in our church that are doing the same thing. But I've done that. I've invited them into that. And we haven't explicitly said we're training them for leadership. It's more just like life on life, disciple making, trying to help them grow with God. And then I have another circle of men who are already leading that I meet with on a weekly basis as well for ongoing development. That's more of like a small group of guys. But then the thing that we're going to initiate here soon is we're going to roll out kind of like an equipping pathway where we're going to try to go to some of the folks we really see emerging from among the house churches as people of influence, people of character, who are serving the Lord in different ways, who seem to have a sense of calling. And we're going to say, hey, we see what God is doing in your life. We want to meet you where you're at and give you some of like the skills, the training, both to develop your character, but also the skills you might need if God does in fact call you to lead a house church, right? And so we're hoping to identify at least like 10 to 15 people from the 5 house churches that we have right now who'd be willing to like engage in this pathway, which involves going to taking some classes, but also some like mentoring relationships and stuff to prepare them for that role.
And practical assignments.
Yes. Yeah.
I throw this in here. That's my latest study I'm still working on, so it's not published yet. But we looked at what were the formative factors in the life of effective catalysts. And this is an early finding. The most significant one is challenging assignments. Someone gave them an assignment that was one shoe size too big for them, and that stretched them.
That's good.
Yeah, anybody else with any comment? Anything you want to challenge? Anything you want to wrestle to think, well, what can practically come out of this? How can this be applied to our context?
Brian Johnson, what is the Kansas City Underground learning about like, you know, about like not just about deploying microchurches on the ground level, but in terms of like, but maybe you'd use the language of like maybe like hub director development, but like in terms of like developing some of those like higher level leaders that are able to facilitate, you know, the formation of new hubs, et cetera. What are you guys learning about that right now?
I'm hesitant to come off mute because of the noises around me, and I'm recording this, so apologies if you hear random things in the background. I'm just super encouraged by what you shared, Emmanuel, and was taking notes and thinking about how to run this past all of our hub directors. I think the thing that stands out that is not unfamiliar but is more like double down is the conversation Rob and I were having yesterday was we think simple, reproducible, fast, ordinary people, and we've done a really good job creating early training, expectant obedience, listen to God in prayer, and follow him quickly in that, and expect multiplication, reproduction, and we've seen that. But it's in the later phases of the work that we do around like what is emerging that we don't have the depth that we long for. And so to answer your question specifically, it's like we need that depth to elevate the spiritual hunger in those later phases of disciples are being made, microchurches are forming. Like I hear the stuff you're saying, Josh, along with everything I heard from Emmanuel, and it's like you're meeting the depth of the emergence of leaders in a way that I don't think we've done the best job yet to expect continued multiplication. Like, we're set up really well for 1 to 2 generations and not so well for 3 and 4, if I was just being vulnerable and now remembering that this is being recorded and sent out. But it's
Modeling vulnerability is good.
yeah, it's not for a lack of desire for that continued 3 and 4 and 5 and onward generations. It's we put so much emphasis on the training for that early movement, and there is depth there. We just haven't paid enough attention to how do we take the things like what we're hearing today and go, how do we create that ongoing training for what emerges that would catalyze more. So we're leaning into that. It's kind of next phase of the journey for us.
It may be the obvious, Brian, but just to encourage you from a perspective from a distance, you see the clear correlation between the emphasis you have placed on the first 2 generations, and you say there is, it is solid, there is a depth there. So here you go, right? You're reaping what you have sown. The good news is, as you turn your attention to what you see is shallow or lacks the depth, I think we can confidently say you will see the fruit of that as well, and you will reap it as well. I'm saying this because I know you have a lot on your plate, and hopefully strengthen in you the, oh yes, I need to make this happen. If I don't make it happen, it won't happen. So, Brian, as a brother, make it happen.
Hi, Todd.
See you guys. Thanks for including me. It was really rich, and I appreciate the time. Hopefully, connect more soon. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
See ya.
All right. Well, John, you got anything else you want to throw in?
No, I'm just sitting here wrestling with the whole idea that older people drop off in hunger for God. They don't just plateau, and just mentally comparing that to a paradigm that I think I inherited from older mentors in the megachurch world, which is that older people hit a level of maturity that kind of gives them a perspective on youthfulness that is actually somehow more spiritual. And I am hearing this and just kind of wrestling with that in my mind, that there was something about growing older and losing that hunger that was presented to me as a sign of maturity that when I was young didn't resonate with me much, and even now as I get older and I feel that, I don't feel it as maturity as much as I do kind of feel it more as decline or apathy, or I feel convicted about it, not confident in it. So I don't know, that's going to mess up my weekend. Thanks, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I wrote about that in my book, and I think partially one of the reasons I wrote the book that I did was because I've been training and developing leaders and overseeing house churches for better part of 13 years, and I'd been really disturbed by the number of people we'd developed and trained who just kind of had been really awesome for a period, but then had really dropped off once they hit a life stage transition. So for some folks that was going from being single, early marriage to having kids, and all of a sudden they're not in the fight anymore. For others it was actually going into the empty nester stage, where they just seem to get distracted and kind of lose vision and passion and that kind of thing. And so I was really digging into that question of what is it that helps people go the long haul, one of the things that I came away with is that we were putting a lot of energy into method and skill development and training people how to lead a certain way at a certain time in a certain place. But we weren't but I was like, but I realized, it's actually some of these more like character and DNA elements. Like it's really what Emmanuel is talking about, like the radical commitment to learning, for instance, right? Like if you develop that deeply in someone, then they will continue to adapt and learn through the different stages of life. That's really an element of like conviction and character more so than it is just a skill. And so one of my convictions was we need to turn that up. We need to do more of that earlier, which was hard because in my context at the time, we were growing so rapidly. We just felt like we needed to throw any kind of training we could at people. Like we were like, hey, here's how you interpret the Bible. Okay, you're not in any kind of major sin. Cool, go lead a group. Like we were like, because things were moving so fast. But I think I gained a deeper appreciation for the need to really focus on character development. That doesn't just, it's not just actionable for what people are doing right now, but looks ahead to the fruit we hope they'll bear decades down the road.
And to build on that, John, in response to what you said, disequilibrium is a good thing. So I let you sit on it, but I don't want your weekend to be messed up. I rather want it to turn into a transformative weekend. So in my PhD studies in leadership development, I had the privilege digging deep on Richard Clinton, also known as Bobby Clinton. The Making of a Leader is his most popular title. And he speaks about the timeline in a leader and the stages in a leader's life. I'm sure you don't have to buy the book. You will find stuff on the internet, or you can ask your AI buddy to dig out gold nuggets for you. But he basically speaks of convergence as a season. I suppose you're in your mid-50s, early 50s or so. Is that right?
Yeah, I just turned 50 this year.
50, okay. Which after ministry productivity is the season where all experiences gained, all character developed, all competencies and skill developed converges into a sweet spot of ministry, sort of. I would encourage you in your processing to check out what Clinton has to say about your life season, and it might be super helpful.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, Brian Johnson is our recorder here, and he's got to pop off. And I think we've had a great discussion. I found this really stimulating, and I'm really excited that we recorded this and we can get this out to the larger collective. I think it's going to stimulate some good ongoing conversation. Yeah, I mean, just to you, Emmanuel, Brave Future is a pretty big tent. We represent networks and practitioners doing a number of different things really all over the country and Europe as well, and Australia. But many of these movements are very young, like they're very new to what they're doing. And so we're forming our expectations. We're trying to figure out like what is leadership development in our context. And so to have your insight injected at this moment is helpful to us. And so to anyone who listens to this later, I think it'd be sweet if you read Emmanuel's book, What Actually Starts Movements. Where we're using elements of it on my team to develop our thinking, and it's been really helpful. So, yeah, thanks again, Emmanuel, and thanks to everyone who tuned in for this.
Absolute pleasure to meet all of you. If I can serve you in any way as you process this more, do we have a way to connect, Joshua? Are you sending out a follow-up message?
Oh, yeah. I'll send out the video to folks. I'll send out a link to to this whole thing, and I'll include your email address. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's great.
All right, guys. Much love to you all.
Emmanuel.
Everyone.